Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A session with us. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday night so far. We're going to talk about all of the latest in the world of Star Wars news and take your guys' questions and comments, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. We have some questions firing in already. So if you want to make sure you get some questions on tonight's stream, make sure you send them into our chat. As always, it is first come, first serve. But if you send in a super chat, guaranteed answer on the stream tonight, as well as supporting the channel. And we really survive off the super chats and support of our patrons and YouTube membership program members. So make sure you check those out as well. They really help out our channel. If you're of a certain tier, you can have priority chat access as well with our streams. So make sure you check that out. We're going to talk about all the latest in Star Wars news, including some of the big publishing announcements from New York Comic Con last weekend. We got the announcement of a new book, which we covered last stream as the listing came out right as we were on stream. So we got to talk about it and speculate about it, but now we know exactly what Star Wars Legacy is going to be. We also got the announcement of some new comics, as well as a whole new book series from Lucasfilm Publishing. So we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about some other comments made by some actors about certain movies that are coming out as well with Star Wars, as well as, and let's start the stream off with this, the unfortunate passing of Drew Struzan, who is one of the most indelible parts of Star Wars for a long time. He did the poster art for so many Star Wars movies, including the re-releases of the original trilogy and special edition. He did all three of the main posters for the Star Wars prequel trilogy. He did a D23 giveaway poster for The Force Awakens, which I still have proudly displayed in my area in my house. And then also he did dozens of Star Wars book covers. Most of the Bantam era book covers, are from Drew Struzan, as well as a variety of other famous posters like Back to the Future, E.T., Indiana Jones. The guy was an absolute legend. He had been struggling for a little while and just recently passed away at the age of 78. So our thoughts and prayers out to Drew Struzan. Thank you for all your great work. Hopefully he rests in peace, and really appreciate his incredible contribution to the world of Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I mean, just so many posters today kind of go for the whole floating heads aesthetic. It just doesn't look great. I understand it's for billing purposes. It's so people can be like, "Hey, you know, I want to make sure that I'm getting my cut, that this is like part of my contract and all." But there's an art that was there with posters that's just been completely gone, right? So I mean, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be Drew Struzan. Like, I don't have a Drew Struzan Empire Strikes Back post behind me, but like that sort of semblance of like trying to take iconic scenes of the film, kind of blend it together, give you a vibe of what the film is going to be like. That you can only really do when it's like hand drawn and painted. Like that's something that we just will not ever get again, and it's just such a shame. And it's not just Star Wars. Like we've seen him do it for Indiana Jones. He did for the original Harry Potter movies for a couple of them, right? He's been the guy for so many franchises, and hearing about his Alzheimer's diagnosis and then waking up today and seeing like, "Oh, man, he passed yesterday." It's just like, what a shame, and I thought it was really fitting that his family also, like, did, like, a Drew Struzan style painting of him, right? Or maybe he did one of himself, a self-portrait or whatever, but it's like a nice, almost, like, final way of being like, "Hey, that's all he wrote, but at least this is, like, what you'll remember him by, like, just this iconic style," and one that's defined so many generations at this point of filmmaking, arts. I mean, like, he's even drawn some covers for Bantam, like you said, and some from the early New Jedi Order. Just it's such a shame that we couldn't see anything really past the 2015. Like, I would love if he just had done, like, one final set for the sequels, just so we could be like, "Hey, we have the special editions of Star Wars 4 through 6. We have episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then we have, like, a nice, like, tribute kind of art at the end of the trilogy." But, we don't know what his personal life was like. Maybe he was already dealing with Alzheimer's and stuff like that, so it's a bit of a shame, but, rest in peace to him. Hope his family's taking care of themselves, and, it's always tough losing a member of the Star Wars family.
Absolutely. And he is really just one of those people that is so a part of the iconography of Star Wars to me, just because of growing up as a prequel kid. I mean, having those posters all on my wall growing up, having still some of those posters on my wall, and Indiana Jones as well. Just like his art defined a generation. I mean, he did so many things that when I think of Star Wars, especially when I think of Star Wars movie posters, it's always Drew Struzan. And so, yeah, he's an incredible talent. We did a whole tier list ranking movie posters, so if you want to see where we ranked his, you can see that. But we talked one of the things we talked about on there is, the just the legacy of painted movie posters and the way that legacy has slowly died in favor of these Photoshop posters, and they just don't bring the same spirit, the same thrill, the same excitement of seeing what is that going to be. And Drew Struzan's absolutely a massive part of that lineage and what kind of the visualization of Star Wars has been. So yeah, it's really a sad loss, a big one for sure. But we're gonna move on with the rest of our show. So let us know your guys' favorite Drew Struzan poster in the comments. We'd love to hear what you guys, which one really makes you think of Drew's work over the past 40 years basically. But let's move on to some new announcements and a little happier news. New York Comic Con 2025 had some fairly decent sized announcements for Star Wars, specifically the book announcement, which we had gotten to drop kind of a breaking news story on last week as we streamed on Wednesday last week instead of Tuesday. And the listing while we were streaming went up for Star Wars Legacy on Penguin Random House's website by Madeline Rowe. And we were speculating, what could this book be? Obviously, it has the same title as one of the most iconic Star Wars comic lines of all time, with Star Wars Legacy being a series that took place 100 years or so after Return of the Jedi and had a whole new generation of Skywalkers. And we kind of thought, with the word legacy, it's got to mean Rey, and it's got to mean somewhere in the sequel timeline. We both thought it would be post Rise of Skywalker, but they have announced that it is not post Rise of Skywalker. It is between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So we got a new cover for Legacy, which I got to say looks really, really good. I think it's a nice cover. I love the colors. I would love covers to go back a little bit to the Drew Struzan style of the old days of, like, let's throw some structures and different buildings and things in the background that make you go, okay, what is that place? Where are we going? It is, another floating body poster, but at least it's artfully done, and I do think it looks really, really nice. The colors are great. Star Wars posters in general, or Star Wars book covers, excuse me, in general, recently have been pretty good. But the book itself is set between episodes 8 and 9 and stars Rey and Leia as they embark on a quest to repair Rey's lightsaber and rekindle the legacy of the Jedi. After barely escaping the First Order on Crate, Rey and the Resistance are struggling to rebuild. Her friends need the Last Jedi more than ever, but Rey feels alone and overwhelmed. Jedi tradition is built on masters and apprentices, and Rey's teacher is gone. Leia tries her best to train Rey in the ways of the Force, as Luke did for so many years, but Leia's knowledge is limited. Excuse me. Rey's lightsaber is broken, and the specter of Kylo Ren and regrets from the past haunt them both. How can Leia pass the torch when she herself is unsure of the way? So that's the synopsis for Star Wars Legacy. It is coming out in July next year, July 28th to be precise, which is a long ways away. We kind of don't usually hear about this mid to late year drops for Star Wars books until the beginning of the next year. Like, I feel like we didn't hear about Bad Batch Sanctuary until the beginning of this year. We didn't hear about Master of Evil until Celebration. So we this is I think telling that this is probably our second adult novel we're getting next year, because we're getting the Outlaws prequel book in February. And it seems like we're not getting anything else until this book when it comes to the mainline Penguin Random House books. But Sonic, now that we have the reveal fully of Star Wars Legacy, when it takes place, who it's starring, what it's kind of about, what are your thoughts on Star Wars Legacy?
I mean, of course, I would definitely prefer just opening up the timeline after the Rise of Skywalker. But I can also see the logic behind this, especially with now Legacy of Vader kinda coming out, been pretty well received. Obviously, Charles Soule has kind of been the authoritative figure around Kylo Ren in canon outside of, like, the movies. So seeing what he's been able to do, kind of flesh out, that's still considered to be an ongoing series. We're not really sure about some of the other mainline comics, but this one seems like it's at least guaranteed 12 versus the other ones being around 10, so I figured this one has a chance of going to, like, 25-ish issues, which would pair up pretty nicely with the fact that he is also on the cover of this. He's pretty hard to miss on most Star Wars covers, but here he's kind of, like, in the shadow and the angles of Rey and Leia. I didn't even see him at first when I first looked at the cover, but, yeah, I mean, I think the more he like, really sit down with this, look more at the log line, the full synopsis, the more I'm excited for it. Like, if you just look at the straight log line of like, "Oh, this is about repairing the Skywalker lightsaber," it's like, okay, sure." Like, I could piece that together with my head canon or something, but the fact that we're going back to Tython, which is featured heavily in Shadow of the Sith, and is a big part of the Mandoverse in season 2 of Mandalorian, that's really cool. The fact that this will be probably, like, a way to get a more complete final arc for Carrie Fisher and her performance as Leia. I mean, if you look at The Force Awakens, Harrison Ford has about 22 to 24 minutes as Han, that's his movie. The Last Jedi, Mark Hamill has about 20 to 22 minutes, and it's the best acting he's ever done as Luke, in my opinion. Yeah, that's his film, right? That was the goal, and that was the plan, according to Kathleen Kennedy, for The Rise of Skywalker, Duel of the Fates, or whatever was intended before her passing. It just didn't turn out to be true because she unfortunately passed away even before The Last Jedi was released. So we got pieced together footage. I know there's issues with, like, necessarily matching up different camera lenses and lighting situations, between The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, but using only The Force Awakens clips, we got, what, 4 to 8 minutes of her, and it's pretty limited. It's like you can very clearly tell they're doing the very best there, but it's a bit lifeless with the fact that it's not intended for that scene. It's not really intended for this to carry as a full performance for Carrie Fisher. So this is a book that I think can actually finally fill in like what should have been, what could have been. And now that we're informed by what the Rise of Skywalker is, this allows us to maybe pass through some of the pitfalls that might be there with like just trying to like open up everything too big. Now you know a clear endpoint, yes, but now you know how to actually get there. And it's really cool to think about like what was that training like. We've had like the Legions comics, we've had a couple of things in this era, like Resistance Reborn. Like it's all that stuff is immediate after The Last Jedi, but we don't really have much otherwise. We now have this Jaws of Jakku audiobook from Audible that came out as well. It's like they're finally starting to open up what the training is going to look like for Ray. It doesn't really seem to have huge plans for like an animated series or anything for Ray to like feature in, and we get to see more of her training. At least nothing more than probably like a Tales of season or something. So yeah, it's really important to actually see what Leia's training was like, and we know for a fact in canon that she abandons her training pretty quickly, right? She's actually a bit more aggressive about following through on her training in canon than she is in Legends, but she also drops it for basically the same amount of time. She doesn't really use it in the way that we think about other than saving herself in The Last Jedi. So seeing her actually pick up the pieces after the whole horrible vision that she had when she was, first facing off against Luke in her final training test, it's like, okay, like she got close to that level of being like what would be considered a Jedi Knight in the post Return of the Jedi timeline, but she never completed that. Now what is it like picking up those pieces? Does she interact with Luke? Does Luke, Rey, and her have like kind of like these like Zoom force calls and stuff? Does Tython allow them to like have connections with like Anakin, what his role in Shadow of the Sith and how that kind of comes about? What other things about Tython are we gonna get pulled from Legends? What is her own like step up from just barely Jedi Knight level 30 years ago to now suddenly being thrust into like the master, the most powerful and necessarily good force user at this point in the galaxy look like? It's gonna be a challenge. And I think that's what was, gonna be something probably explored if we had a little bit more footage to use of Carrie Fisher in The Rise of Skywalker. Obviously, we don't. So now we get this like a true final crescendo, and I think that's really exciting. I don't necessarily think like she has any vendetta against Rey, like how some of the synopsis kind of was like, oh, it's gonna be a little weird with Rey being the rival of her son, who's a mass murderer and a monster at this point, right? I don't see that because she hugs Rey during The Force Awakens. She tries to give good advice. She, like, tells her, like, "We know the way to get to Luke and everything. I have the little thing on my chain, we'll be good." She's always been supportive, but it'll be very interesting to see what, like, the ups and downs of a true relationship will look like, right? We see a little bit of that from what, we got of, the Rey and Leia dialogue that got patched around, and now I think this is a great chance to see that. Yeah, I'm excited just for Rey to properly have, like, training at least detailed out, right? Like, it's cool to get a full obstacle course. I think that is a pretty strong depiction of, like, her martial sense of the Force, but what about, like, okay, where is her intuition leading towards? Why would she be so easily, like, able to say, like, "No, I'm gonna become a Skywalker, I feel adopted by them." Like, what about what Leia teaches is different than what Luke teaches her and what she's gonna take with the ancient Jedi text? There's so much to mine here. I'm pretty excited about it. This is also from an author who wrote in the first From a Certain Point of View, and I believe it was the Alderaan story from Breha's point of view just before its destruction, and that was one of the better received books, stories out of that, well-received short story collection there, so all the pieces seem in play for like a really strong book. And, as a little aesthetic thing too, the cover really does remind me of Master and Apprentice, and that's a great novel in canon. So I'm hoping that there is maybe some intentionality there too, because the color and everything looks so similar too. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot that I think is going to be rich in mind here, and it'll really take a huge step forward for the character. And Leia has just been so good at books. I'm expecting this to just be another strong, strong case for her as well.
Yeah, I hope so for sure. I think Leia's inclusion is something that's definitely needed in this time period, especially if we're talking about, kind of more rich storytelling. Leia is one of the characters that, due to the circumstances of the Rise of Skywalker's shooting, you have to do a lot with her between 8 and 9 to really develop her character and, like, figure out who she is as she's building towards ultimately kind of her sacrifice in the Rise of Skywalker. So that'll help out that character a lot if we're able to do that here in this book. As for the Rey stuff, like, and I know Critical Thinker has some thoughts down here as well. We'll get to your thoughts soon. It is seemingly like being set between 8 and 9, it is seemingly just another character book that is going to help build out the character, help, bridge the gap between two films, and doesn't add much in terms of plot. And yes, that can be disappointing. I mean, we'll see. I don't personally get too excited for pretty much any of these character books until I read them because most of them, a lot of them have been very good. Like you're mentioning Master and Apprentice. I think the art here also really reminds me of Brotherhood, different color scheme, but the way it's drawn, whatever artist drew it, I almost looks like the exact same artist as Brotherhood. But Brotherhood, uh, Master and Apprentice, there have been a lot of good character books in canon, but we also this just felt like a chance to finally get some plot books, something that went beyond the Rise of Skywalker with this character to really, even if it was just like a week beyond the Rise of Skywalker, and it's like, okay, I have to deal with the legacy now. I chose the name Skywalker. Now I've been adopted into that family. How do I deal with that legacy? I think that was what I was hoping for. I still think this can be a very, very good book. Always cautiously optimistic when it's a new Star Wars author, as you mentioned, wrote a short story in From a Certain Point of View, but new to the novel side. And I think that can be great, like a Mike Chen or an Adam Christopher. It can also be a Sam Maggs with Jedi Battle Scars. So I'm in between. You never know, but just in concept, going back to the sequels, I think is a positive nonetheless for the novels. We have to start doing something with these characters and with this timeline. The Force Awakens 10 year is basically here, and we haven't gotten really anything for the 10-year anniversary of the Force Awakens. And just the idea of bringing these characters back and finally doing something with them. I know personally for me, as somebody who, you know, is a Star Wars fan who grew up with the main 6 movies and with the Clone Wars, and, like, that's most of what I think of when I think of Star Wars, and everything else is newer Star Wars, right? And it feels more like Star Wars when you're constantly revisiting these characters over and over again. So when you're a distance away from them for so long, you have to you have to kind of remind yourself, especially when it comes to the sequels and they take place so far after the rest of the continuity, the rest of the story we've really been going with recently, right? So I think it's never a bad thing to go back to this era. It's an era that's completely lacking, has almost zero literature at all in any form, comics, novels, short stories. There's almost nothing in this era. And so it's really nice to be able to actually get some story here. And I think this also makes sense with the one other story that takes place between 8 and 9, Resistance Reborn, which is predominantly a Finn and Poe book, predominantly a Poe book. He is really the main character. And that was one of the things I was most disappointed with that book being, because at the time I was really wanting to know, okay, what happens now with Rey? She's been deemed the last Jedi. What's going on with her? What's she going to be like now that we get to the Rise of Skywalker? And that book originally came out, before the film even dropped. So it was a big disappointment that we barely touched on Rey at all in that book. This is our chance to finally get to add a little bit of flavor, add some layers to her story, and doing it in conjunction with Leia, I think, is a smart move, because you have that grounding to the original trilogy. You have that grounding to the spirit that's there within those characters into the sequel. So you really do need a little bit of that. But building out the resistance is another big one. Like, we're talking about the fall of resistance on Crate. Almost nothing with that so far in between 8 and 9. Like, how do they get the new members of their crew? How do they have all these things that happen, and they how do they survive, really, throughout that 1 year gap? We barely have any of that information. So continuing to get that is a positive to me, because it's a complete black hole of Star Wars currently between 8 and 9, and then after 9. So I'm excited to return to it. I just hope it's great storytelling. Again, kind of like I say every time we talk about the sequels, if we don't have great storytelling in the sequels, it's just another era. It's another notch on the, like, should we return to this? Well, and the only way to start redeeming is to continue to get better and better and better and better stories, and elevate this as an era of lore. And so I'm really hoping that they do something cool with it, and it's not just your kind of basic character book. I hope they really go into what Leia means to Rey as a teacher, as opposed to what Luke and Han meant to her. I hope we really go into what Leia's methods for using the Force are, Leia's methods for teaching the Force, maybe her connection to Luke. Does she talk to Luke much in this story? I'm hoping so, because she wasn't ever a Jedi knight or master. She never learned how to teach the Force. So I want to know, how is that bridge going to be there between the passage of knowledge between Luke and to Leia? And then ultimately, kind of, why is Luke there, a part of that adoption scene at the end of the Rise of Skywalker? Like, I think a connection between Luke and Rey here, Luke and Leia here, that would do wonders for this story as well. So a lot of cool things that could be coming from this story. Hopefully it's one of the best sequel era stories we've gotten, and hopefully it continues off of what we hope Final Order can be, or Last Order, excuse me, can be this year, and continues to add layers to the sequel trilogy, so that as we get closer and closer to Starfighter returning us to that era, as we get closer and closer to maybe having a Rey movie, closer and closer to the Kinberg trilogy possibly happening, we have some things, some building blocks, some layers to look forward to, and some new insights for these characters. I just also hope that whatever they do here with this, they use it a little bit further into the character when we see the movies. That's the one thing you really hope, especially when we have the chance to explore these characters again. But what do you guys think about Star Wars Legacy announcement. Are you excited about it? Are you a sequel fan? Are you interested in seeing more of the sequels, or do you not care at all? And will you give this a chance, even if it is really, really good? Will you give this a chance? Because I think it's time to hopefully get some great sequel era stories and return to this era. We do have some comments here about this book from some of our fans in the comment section. Again, keep firing in those chats. Make sure you send them in. It is first come first serve, but if you talk to us about the specific topic we're on, you get called up into the chat earlier, like right now. We have Critical Thinker who says, I feel like the premise and especially setting in between films means that this book could easily fall into the trap of being boring gap filler, like a lot of mediocre Star Wars books, with a very good writer that could be avoided, with a very good writer that could be avoided, like Shadow of the Sith, but especially if they're making a movie about Rey. If they're making it, lol, the writer will have to essentially set nothing important in stone to keep things open. Well, I think the thing by going in this gap, you alleviate the fact that she can't take any big swings by making there be a bookend already on where Rey can go, which is one of the reasons why my excitement is generally tempered, because this is a it's a 1 year gap story, right? So like there's not much you can do to change Rey. Rey doesn't change that dramatically between where we see her in The Last Jedi and who she is in The Rise of Skywalker. I think maybe the only real big change in her character, she feels like she has a little bit of darkness pulling at her when she has that moment with thinking she kills Chewbacca. It's something that she talks about in the film as like, I've been feeling this, I'm worried about my power type of thing. I think that's one of the few directions you can go in terms of like her character kind of morphing. Other than that, it's more about her getting stronger, more powerful, more confident, more sure of herself and her abilities. So I think that's where the story is going to go. It's just more a matter of whether they can do the dynamics well enough, because, like, Master and Apprentice isn't anything special in terms of storytelling, but it is special in terms of character development and character dynamics. And so you can have absolutely great Star Wars books that develop their characters phenomenally. With mediocre plot, you just have to really nail that. And so I think Leia is really the big key, more so than even Rey. Leia unlocks this story, and hopefully we do get that.
Yeah, I mean, again, the timeline of the sequels is always going to be one of its biggest issues. It's just that it's too tight, right? It's not like the prequels where you have 10 years between episode 1 and 2, and both Legends and canon has not really developed those eras, right? It just kind of chooses to be like it's peaceful, even though the CIS and everything is rising up in the background, right? So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it is kind of that sort of situation where that much time there with the 10 years and then the 3 years between episode 2 and 3 where you can see the full-fledged war, right? Like, that's just something that even if you can point out, like, "Hey, the prequels really didn't have so much characterization changes per se, or like they were just completely new slates every film," that helps it because you can do so much in those gaps, and years are just helpful. This is the biggest gap that we have in the sequel trilogy because 7 and 8, that's it's still something I don't love, since the premiere. Like, I think it was bold, but it was a little too bold because there's certain things that, like, Ryan Johnson is saying now, like, a lot of Finn's arc, which, has been criticized by Boyega and everything, right? He recently came out and said, like, it was very much inspired by him kinda leaving, like, a very hyper conservative upbringing and feeling like, "Oh, sometimes you don't wanna go to the next thing, you kinda just wanna leave it all." And that's great, but you can't really show that sometimes in, like, 5 minutes of a gap between 7 and 8, right? If we had, like, 3, 4 months and, like, Finn was saying, like, "Yeah, no, I've been here too long, like, I really need to start moving, I really need to, like, actually go with my intentions at the start of The Force Awakens and, like, leave it all behind, just go with Rey, be somewhere safe," right? I think that hits a lot harder here, right? So, at least 8 to 9 has this year gap, right? Resistance Reborn doesn't really do a lot going into The Rise of Skywalker. I think that's fully true, right? It does a little bit of quasi sequel work for Bloodline, which I think is pretty nice. Ransom Caster 4 kind of gets his little due there, and it's fine. It's fine, right? But I think this is the book that actually has potential because, like you said, it'll be good for Ray's growth and her strength and like why she's so much more skilled by the start of 9. Like, yeah, it's a lot of show don't tell in that film, and it does a pretty decent job in my opinion with her floating with the rocks, with her going through the whole obstacle course, and then it teases a little bit of that darkness, that frustration that she's been dealing with. I think that's actually done pretty well because in the beginning of the film, considering how else everything else is just so hectically paced at times. But this is a great chance for her to, like, what was that transition like? What was it? Was it a lot of mental stuff? Or was it a lot of her digging through these Jedi texts? Was it like we went if we she got kinda stuck on agent class and she was actually advancing quite a bit in her training, and now she kinda feels held back? Are we gonna kinda have it like how the Clone Wars has, like, Dooku and Anakin and Obi-Wan meeting, like, 2, 3, 4 extra times, even though that line in Episode 3 is like, "My powers have doubled since the last time we met." Count, right? It's like, well, last time you met was, like, 2 weeks ago, right? Like, you can kind of play with that flexibility here. It's not something I truly love. I don't love in the Clone Wars either, but this is what this book offers here. And again, I'm gonna harp on it. It's gonna be a book that's really important for Leia, and I think it'll be nice to see connective tissue between Bloodline, between Shadow of the Sith, kinda if you're gonna do these, like, almost standalone-ish books that are supposed to be gap fillers, connect elements of the story to plot and stuff that was already developed in other books, because that encourages people to be like, "I wanna read sequel era or sequel adjacent books." I wouldn't be surprised that the setting on Titan isn't simply because, like, we're gonna get, well, maybe possibly some sort of connection or reference to it in the Mandalorian Grogu film, and obviously it was in season 2, but because specifically what Luke underwent while he was on Titan, while he was also on the Seeing Stone. So that stuff is what's exciting me, that Leia has a chance to get really a lot of stuff out of that, connecting with her brother, connecting with, like, the state of the galaxy since she's joined the Resistance, what it's like to take a step away from that military structure and let, Poe and Finn kinda take charge a little bit more, having this again, this incredible challenge of like, I've was never truly a master, right? I left my brother to handle my son, and look how that turned out, and now I have to take that challenge and cancel it out. Kind, it's like she is stepping quite literally in the shoes of Obi-Wan and Yoda, right? Just for the new generation. That's a difficult challenge, and I think there's a lot of story potential, and you don't need to feel like super limited because again, she doesn't have a huge role in the Rise of Skywalker. And frankly, you can also write a bit of the story to be like she is slowly dying, right? Like a lot of the Rise of Skywalker kind of insinuates, even straight up says with Snap Wexy, like she's not doing great. She's holding on, right? Like this would be a great way to be like, she also has a bit of a ticking clock. Like, what is she going to be able to achieve fundamentally for Rey to have a fighting chance? For her to like maybe prepare to save her son as a final act. There's a lot of small things that can definitely be built out and fleshed out, especially for Leia. For Rey, I can see a little bit of that argument, but I think Leia, because of how wonderful Bloodline is, because of the chance of connecting with Luke's story and Shadow Sith, I think she has a lot of potential. I will push back a little bit on what you're saying about Lucino and Stover could pull it off because you mentioned that you haven't really read Gray or Christopher Chen, and those are arguably the 3 best canon authors. Like Claudia Gray, until very recently, I think had a fighting chance against Timothy Zahn and what he's written as like a Star Wars writer in general. She was on a hot start. It's more recently with like some of the more recent High Republic offerings that I haven't as impressed, but her adult novel work has always been fantastic. I mean, Master and Apprentice is written by her. If there's any sort of inspiration being done here, I wouldn't be surprised if the writer of this book had a conversation. Because it was like, I'm trying to almost make a sequel era parallel to this relationship that is in an undefined period, right? So I'll push back on saying only Lucino and Stover can do that. We've seen Gray and Christopher came out of nowhere too. We're like, okay, like it was a cool panel at in 2022 at Celebration. All right, we were there for it, and then when the book came out, it shocked us. It blew it. We were like, "What? Like this is what he had up his sleeve?" So I'd rather be optimistic about somebody who's already proven like a pretty interesting storyteller, right? This is not a situation like we have with Battle Scars with Sam Maggs, who's already had a little bit of like a mixed reception in other franchises. This is somebody who had like a nice little noteworthy, like, "Hey, that was a pretty good story," and it turned out pretty great here in from a certain point of view, and that has a chance for a big novel. Same thing happened just this year with the Bad Batch book, right? That was not a book either of us were very excited for, and that writer also wrote a short story and then got pretty good reception there, got this full-fledged book here, and it was like, wow, this is like a really strong connective tissue between the character development of season 2 and season 3 for the batch themselves. So yeah, I think it'll be pretty good. And I get what you're saying, you know, as honest. These are all wonderful writers. I'm not going to deny that. I've read all their books, but I've also read these canon authors, so I can make a little bit more of a direct comparison. And I think just saying, oh, you know, like, if will they have the chance to do it, right? Will they be able to match that output? It's like, well, we have seen it from Claudia Gray, we have seen it from Adam Christopher, and we're gonna hopefully see it again from Mike Chen just in a couple months here. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I think in regards to both of your guys' points, yours and Critical Thinkers, I mean, I think it is Star Wars canon has basically feasted on just trying to make little tiny things interesting, and we've seen it to varying results. I mean, the one thing I guess I'd say is that, as we've talked about in the past, Critical Thinker, Star Wars canon books have a lot lower floor than Legends have had, just because they are less ambitious. So they don't do anything that it's like incredibly offensive most of the time. And so I think this will be fine. And like you said, Resistance Reborn, like I, as somebody who's read Resistance Reborn, I thought it was okay. It was disappointing because at the time too, when I saw Last Jedi, I enjoyed most of it. There were a few things that gnawed at me even when seeing it, but overall, still in the overwhelming positivity I felt about The Force Awakens, still in kind of this era. I loved Rogue One. I was excited for The Rise of Skywalker. I liked Last Jedi a lot. And so it's been the things that haven't followed up with The Last Jedi that where I've fallen off The Last Jedi, because I just feel like the storytelling itself was not as good as it felt back in 2017, especially when changes after ultimately cost a lot of the decisions that kind of set up and helped part of it fall apart. But in regards to Resistance Reborn, like, I'm saying that all in the context of, like, I was very excited for Resistance Reborn, and I thought it was one of the most disappointing canon books I've read, just because I was very excited to read it before the movie, like I read Catalyst before Rogue One. And unlike Catalyst, which is a Lucino book, where I felt like almost essential to see Rogue One to read Catalyst, I can't have imagined not reading it before I saw Rogue One. Resistance Reborn, I was like, okay, nothing in the story actually mattered to at all to the Rise of Skywalker. And so I think this can go one of two ways, like both of you are saying. It does take a special writer to be able to take kind of meaningless information, like you said earlier, Sonic, like headcanon stuff that you really don't care if it's ever answered or not, and actually make it something that's important. Madeline Rowe might be that next author to do it. She might not. And regardless, personally for me, I'm tepid on it. I'm a little more excited for this than I'm a lot more excited for this than the Outlaws tie-in book. The only reason it's even close is because of Mike Chen's writing the Outlaws tie-in book. Otherwise I wouldn't care at all about that book. This is a book I care a little bit more about story-wise, but I'm more tepid on just the fact that I've seen a lot of Star Wars authors, new Star Wars authors come and write okay books and then leave. And I've seen other Star Wars first time writers come in and write great ones and then stay around the franchise. So we'll see. I'm kind of, as when it comes to 2026 and Star Wars publishing, I got to be honest though, I'm just kind of whelmed by what we're seeing so far. It's like, okay, we got a book that could have been really cool sounding, but it's taking place in between 8 and 9 instead of after 9. Okay, we got a tie into Outlaws, which at that point will have come out over a year and a half before the book. And then now we got the thing we're going to talk about next, which is Eyes Like Stars, a new Star Wars romance novel. This was the other novel announced at Star Wars Celebration. So we talked about last stream, I believe, what is going on with young adults. We know absolutely nothing from the young adult side of Star Wars. If you look at the release calendar for young adult, there's been almost zero young adult books released that have not had anything to do with the High Republic in years. I think the last one off the top of my head was Crimson Climb before this new one that was just announced. Otherwise, every young adult book has been High Republic. And so I kind of personally felt like either they're phasing young adult out because just the concepts and like the fervor and fandom around young adult has just kind of faded. It's just generally people, they read books of certain franchises or styles, and it doesn't have to be young adult. I know the romance novel has kind of taken that spot of a lot of readers who were reading and obsessed with young adult in the early 2010s, late 2000s. And so it makes a lot of sense that we move from that into a romance novel. This one's written by Ashley Poston. It's called Eyes Like Stars, and it has a dreamlike cover for the young adult audience, which features a couple in search of their happily ever after in a galaxy far, far away. The charming young adult romance, set about a year and a half before The Force Awakens, features all new characters, a mysterious artifact, and the fearsome First Order. Now, this was announced as the first in a series of genre Star Wars books, they're calling it, which is going to dive into both the romance genre, but also the thriller genre, the mystery genre, and the horror genre. So when we look at Eyes Like Stars, I got to say right off the bat, I mean, I have zero interest in this. It does not sound like something for me. I also had zero interest in Lost Stars, and that ended up being very, very good. And so I'm definitely going to give it a chance because I give every Star Wars novel a chance. Right now, I don't, I'm not excited. I don't care, but I'm excited for the rest of that sentence, which was thriller novel, mystery novel, and horror novel. If this is a series of like, let's tell brand new stories with brand new sets of characters and do brand new things, all while in the trappings of genre, I'm very excited for that. I don't need to be, romance will be for somebody. It's not for me. It'll be for somebody, but the rest of those will be for me and not for the people who like romance. So I'm happy that people who love all types of Star Wars books are getting Star Wars stories in their specific genre. And this is kind of more of a pullback to Legends, where we were actually willing to experiment with style, with form, and say, hey, let's try a B-rate Star Wars horror story. Let's try a Star Wars romance novel. And we don't need to take Han, Luke, and Leia. We don't need to take every famous Star Wars character and do a story about them. We can actually make new characters. And that's been something that's kind of been lost on Star Wars canon for a very long time. In early canon, we got a lot of that. You got Catalyst, which had pretty much all brand new characters. You got the Battlefront first book, which had like all new characters. You had Lost Stars with all new characters. We had a lot of books that had brand new characters. And then once we got High Republic, it was like all the original storytelling, let's just save it for that. And everything else is going to be a tie-in to a movie or show or video game or whatever. So this is nice to know that as the High Republic wrapped up, we're now moving into an era of Star Wars where hopefully if this initiative succeeds and the books are really good, we can actually get original characters and original stories and fall in love with new Star Wars characters for the first time in years. And I'm very excited for that, even if I care less about specifically the romance genre. But I'm hoping that whatever this book does for the romance genre, that Star Wars fans who love romance can actually find some joy in those original characters and see those characters finally come to life in bigger and better ways throughout all of publishing. So Sonic, with the announcement of Eyes Like Stars as well as the genre initiative they're calling it, what are your thoughts on both of those aspects of this whole thing?
I get that it's like the first romance novel of canon. Um, I would say romance has generally been better in canon. I think the Thrawn duology obviously probably has the best example of like romance between big characters. Um, I wouldn't say courtship with Princess Leia does because Han kinda is insane in that, but Lost Stars was a huge surprise, right? And it was a great story to just follow through the original 3 movies, but well, and then obviously leading into its own depiction of Bal Jakku, which was, again, super exciting at that time, but it was also Cien and Thane kinda seeing their upbringing together, seeing how, like, intimate they could get, like, it was a little bit more, um it wasn't, it wasn't that intense, like, there were some, like, pretty strong scenes for sure, right? But I liked what we saw out of that. And then same thing with Temptation of the Force. I think it's a little wordier for sure, but it's also like dealing with these monks that repress themselves, but also fool around in their teenage years, and then like seeing what the trauma of everything's going on and the need to be connected and seeing how it paid off, especially in Trials of the Jedi, has definitely raised that book again for me. Like I'm rereading through certain chapters just to see like was it just bad in the moment without the further context? Like, was this always intended to be truly this bridge? Like, this romance had to happen in this way? And it certainly feels like that. So I think canon has been a lot better. Battle Scars has not been a great example of that. We got the audiobook version of that, and it was in some ways a little traumatic to listen to that. It was there's like raunchier moments in those two other books and even Trials of the Jedi, but wow, it was just kind of shocking just like why this was like so intimate and detailed for between two characters that like, obviously you care about Marin, but you don't care about this other character who will never appear in the next game and is just abandoned by the end of the story and it's all for like a big ruse at the end of the day. There was nothing about it that felt like important to the story or like derived from being together in the story, right? And that was very frustrating to read and just like audio trauma in some way, right, listening to that, so I'm excited for this because it does seem like it's leading more directly into, like, romance as the underlying story. It'll have thriller elements, it'll have some other things going on. That's fine, right? It might not be a book that I enjoy, right? I'm not someone who's opposed to reading romance, but it's not really something what I, like, immediately go for as my first thing in Star Wars, but I mean, it's definitely also aimed for more readers like that, like a female audience that might be like, "Hey, I really heard great things about Lost Stars, and maybe this would be a great way to get into that." I know there's a little bit more of a raunchier, more mature fantasy-ish series on TikTok that everybody talks about called Akatar, and that one I heard is just insane, right? This is obviously not gonna start that in Star Wars, but this will be a good chance to like, hey, like let's deal with romance. Let's actually see what that could mean for these characters who don't necessarily have to have huge weight and stakes, right? Who could just be more reflections of what's the world around like them. And I really do like that it's being set a year and a half before The Force Awakens. This is probably one of the closest chances to like actually getting a little bit more understanding of like the Cold War that's happening before everything blows up at the start of The Force Awakens. Like this well, obviously they're civilians for the most part, or at least the girl is, and but her father's kind of shipping and stuff like that. We have no clue about the guy quite yet. Yeah, I mean it's definitely I've seen some criticism online too of people being like, oh, they're just deliberately like trying to like get a girl audience for this, and I'm like, yeah, but if it's a good book and it doesn't really like it's not like a forced essential read that I have to have and like drudge to like really terribly written romance, who am I to like be upset about? I've seen people like who are gatekeeping like how Star Wars books should be, but you start doing that, then we never get the chance to like expand past like what the 90s achieved. If we want to get back to the 90s level of Star Wars where it's expansive, rich, heavy storytelling, we also need to like be updated for the fact that we're in the 2020s, that there's way different types of books and books are not really read to the same level as they were 30 years ago. So you have to go in the angles that are in the avenues that are being well received these days. So I'm excited for it in that sense of what it could, like, open up. The fact that it's not like the next book is instantly a romance one. They're talking about how the next one could be like a war novel, and we haven't had anything really since the Battlefront tie-ins, right, with Inferno Squad, with Twilight Company. Like, this is a great chance to get a little bit more of, like, into the deeper dive, maybe more classically, like, Rogue Squadron-ish and not so much like Alphabet Squadron, where it's a little bit more of, like, a psychological deconstruction of these characters and a lot of like what it's like to transition from an imperial to a new republic civilian life and a military life, right? There's so many different genres that Star Wars can explore that I think once like the EU really started getting going, it almost got limited in that sense. It was really just like Galaxy of Fear that I could say was like a huge push. There was a bit of a YA push for sure in the late aughts. Like there was like the Rebel Force series and all that, like trying to deal with the main characters in a YA setting, but it wasn't like genre enrichment, right? It wasn't like taking a big stab at that. So even if this is not like a super wonderful book, I'm glad that it has a chance to just keep fleshing ideas and taking new opportunities. If you're not gonna do that in the books, right, like, which are, like, the lowest stake risks that you can take at this point in canon, where else are you gonna do it? It's not like we're begging people to be like, "Let's make a romance Star Wars film." It's like, whoa, that's not what Star Wars is about. Star Wars is a mix of everything. But books, especially a YA setting, yeah, go for it. That is where it thrives. So, more power to this book. I hope it does well. I hope it actually has some really enriching things for people who aren't super into romance. I hope this is something that helps people get their partners into Star Wars because they're like, hey, I enjoyed Lost Stars. I actually found this one pretty good too, and it's a little bit closer to those sequel films that we saw together, like stuff like that. Like if it works out, great. If it doesn't, they'll move on to the next genre, right? At the end of the day, it's also a business. If it's not a great book, it's like, all right, forget about those characters. We move on to the next. But yeah, overall, I'm optimistic. I've already seen people be like, one of these two is going to be on Halcyon Prime and be killed off by Starkiller Base, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, why not? Let's have some Doom romances again in Star Wars. I quite like that stuff.
Hey, yeah, I mean, nothing gets me wanting to read romance more than like some tragedy. You know how I feel
Exactly.
about tragedy in my stories. But yeah, I mean, again, like I don't think there's going to be anything with this book until reviews come out and or until we get to actually review it ourselves that will get me excited for this. But I am just excited for the idea of trying to jump in with original characters into new genres because, like it or not, I mean, Star Wars, some of my favorite Star Wars books came out in the late 2000s, early 2010s, but Star Wars readership was dying at that point, and a lot of it was because we had Legacy of the Force into Fate of the Jedi, a lot of other books like Millennium Falcon and Cross Current Riptide, and all these books that took place so far down into the deep EU that there weren't entry points for new readers. And then you did get the handful of Darth Plagueis and Kenobis that were successful, right? Because they were the rare Star Wars book that actually told stories about characters you've heard of, but also told stories that anybody could read. And so Star Wars has that tendency, especially coming off of big initiatives like we just came off with the High Republic, where like the deeper and deeper you get into the initiative, the more likely you are to lose readers because people have to do homework. And so they can't just jump in. And I think this is probably an initiative to not just bring in new readers from other genres that are popular, but to also provide even more entry points for people, especially because next year is kind of the year of the random tie-ins. For the people who haven't read Outlaws and have no care about the Outlaws book, for the people who might not be sequel fans, right? If we get something that's new, original, I think some people are more likely to jump on board and give that a shot who haven't read Star Wars books than feeling like they have to do all this homework in order to enjoy something. And so I think it's always good to have entry points. I just really do hope with this initiative that if the book is well received, we get sequels because I know we've talked about this in the past too on how we can revive Star Wars publishing into what it felt like back in the day with Legends. Legends, they did so many sequels, and that was one of the things that really just makes you attached to reading, is finding out what happens next to the next characters. When you do all these tie-in books, not only can they sometimes feel less important because they're tackling lesser time periods of the stories that weren't as important to show on screen, right? But they're also there's no sequels coming. So doing sequels, continuing with these characters, continuing with the stories, that's been something that's completely lost on Star Wars canon. And I hope that if this book does well, if the horror book does well, if the mystery book does well, if the thriller book does well, whatever genre they decide to tackle after this, and according to the author Poston, she wrote on Instagram that they have thriller, mystery, and horror books in the works, and there's some amazing stories coming, and people got to keep an eye on this initiative, and hopefully we get more than one next year. Hopefully we get a second one announced for later in the year. I just hope they continue with these. Don't just make them one offs. Don't make them one and dones because that's where we can fall in love with something like Lost Stars, right? And Lost Stars has had a legacy, but it's hard to keep those characters in your heart as much if you're not just revisiting them multiple times over, especially with how many Star Wars books we're inundated with, especially for people like us who read every single one. That makes it, more difficult to compel us to continue going with some of these if you're not providing us with a reason to continue to return and think about your character. So hopefully we get more. Would love that to continue. A critical thinker's thoughts on this says, I'd definitely be interested in another Star Wars horror book, but I'd hope they'd just call in a good writer for it as opposed to just trying to bank on novelty without the quality to back it up. If they're doing other genre Star Wars books, great. I love the idea of greater experimentation and more areas to grow. They just have to do it right. If it's mediocre, it'll dampen the potential a lot. Star Wars usually is not very good at romance. Definitely agree on having more sequels in modern Star Wars books being a good idea. Like Star Wars genre novels need to be at least fairly decent compared to other books in the genre, as opposed to being worse but baking on being Star Wars. Otherwise, I can just go read something somewhere else. Yeah, I think that's one of the problems Star Wars has always had with, specifically, I think, of horror, because Star Wars hasn't. I mean, Star Wars more easily can bake in thriller and mystery. I mean, almost every Star Wars novel has some form of thriller and mystery, right? That may not be true to the format, but they have some level of those genres. Horror, romance, those are more well defined by certain tropes, right? So Star Wars has struggled in the novel department. I think specifically like Galaxy of Fear was a pretty good Goosebumps ripoff. Like that was as good as you can kind of get in terms of ripping off a genre and making it Star Warsy with still being a high quality version of what it's trying to replicate. Death Troopers was good. I enjoyed Death Troopers as a like a cheesy B-rate story, but it's not, like you're saying, critical thinker, going to be amongst the great horror novels of all time. And I think you will have a hard time doing that with Star Wars, just because Star Wars is kind of a genre in and of itself. Like Sonic was saying, it kind of incorporates a little bit of everything, pays homage to everything, sticks in that sci-fi fantasy world. So you have to really narrowly walk the tightrope of making it feel Star Wars while also making it feel like it's part of those genres. For Joe Schreiber, it seemed to be adding Han Solo to Death Troopers, which was his way of trying to make it feel Star Wars. And that to me just felt weird, having Han Solo go on a zombie mission before the original trilogy and then never mention it ever again. Um, but I did enjoy that book for what it was. Red Harvest went a little over the top. So I think we've seen examples of good and bad in the past. I'm not expecting it to be like Stephen King, and I'm not expecting it to be a Court of Rose and Thorns for this novels book, like, or this romance book. I'm not expecting top of the genre, but I would expect it to at least take the tropes and do them in a way that's a little less conventional because of the Star Wars format. Not just say, hey, what's the baseline we need to make a horror book, or a baseline we need to make a romance book, and let's do that, but we'll call guns blasters. Like that's not going to cut it for getting this initiative off the ground. So that's where I do agree with you, like diving all in. And it seems like they're in, like, I don't know, the post from Poston to me is a positive in that seems like she's aware of the other work that the other authors in this initiative are doing, not necessarily for crossing over, but like they kind of have an all maybe a writer's room on like thoughts for how do we dive in and tackle specific genres in this specific style, which is always a positive to me if they're all kind of working within each other to add to the best product.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think this sort of writers' room mentality is probably born out of just the success of what we got from the High Republic, and also like some of like the things that they needed to work on, like some things that are maybe a little too ambitious for the initiative, some things that didn't necessarily click with having to handle adult and young adult and middle school and comics and audio dramas, right? Like this to me seems like it's mostly just gonna be YA books, and if they have any crossover, it'll be very lightly touching on like, "Hey, a character knows this character, they're here for a couple chapters," but the rest of the time, you're with this original cast in this genre. I think That'll be great. We need more YA books like this anyways, like, just entry points, right? Like, I'm not saying we need to have Star Wars suddenly, like, develop its new Hunger Games or something like that. That kinda era is done. Hunger Games is, like, actually surviving off of a lot of its spin-off books and its prequels and everything that have been happening, and those are, like, a lot more adult-oriented. Like, even they've the defining young adult franchise, arguably, of the late 2000s, early 2010s is no longer truly a young adult franchise. So I would say, yeah, okay. Does Star Wars necessarily need to like make this a huge big series? No, but if they use it as a nice staging ground, allow us to like try out different genre, maybe throw a little couple Easter eggs, a little world building for whichever eras it touches on, like, it'd be great, and, like, if this happens to all just be set during the New Republic or, like, The Force Awakens era, that'd be really cool too because, it's 30 years, like, ha let's have some random stories like this, and there was so much about, like, the young Jedi Knights and the junior Jedi Knights, it's like it fits in that little tiny gap where there isn't necessarily anything big yet. We know New Jedi Order is on the horizon, but it's not like, oh, like everything in this galaxy is at peace. It's like there are things you can do. It's a pretty big galaxy, and plenty of people can deal with plenty of issues, right? So I think this would be quite good. I do agree that I did like the Fives arc quite a bit. I also like the Ahsoka arc. I think those have thriller vibes, like you said, critical thinker. Especially the Ahsoka arc is a little bit more like political, and it's kind of like 3 Days of Condor. Like you don't know what the big government conspiracy is, but something's happening, right? So I quite like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what you mean, what you're disagreeing with Liam on about the genre thing. Um, oh, I see what you're. Yeah, okay. I can kind of see that. At the end of the day, though, like you still need if these are starting blocks for people to get into Star Wars, they still need to have like a Star Wars feel to it before they dive deeper into the genre tropings. Like the first couple chapters shouldn't necessarily feel like, oh, like this is something I can read up at like a dollar store romance novel, right? It should still feel like, hey, like this it's just a little bit of like world setting. Like these are the stakes, these are the ships, this is the galaxy, and now these are our characters. Like you can use your prologue, you can use your first couple of chapters before you really dive into the genre graphics. I think that's probably more where Liam is coming from. It's not necessarily like, oh, like we can just write the story and then just have elements and like this is not like a I think like a good example of this is like a Tron, right? Where it's like you don't understand half the stuff that's happening in the world around you, but you're like the vibes are cool and I can lean on the genre and the tropes of that. It can get confusing because sometimes, like, it's awesome, and sometimes you're like, I'm playing catch up here. I really wanna have a something to ground me, right? So that's where some of, like, just the base standard, like, Star Wars feelings of each era of the prequels, of the original trilogy, of the sequels, that should be almost like, here's the door opening to a bigger world, to a bigger possibility, to that niche and what it offers, right? I think that's kinda where you're both going at, and it's I guess I'm trying to meet you guys in the middle.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to say is not that you can't do genre in Star Wars. Of course, I think you could do genre in Star Wars. That's what we've been talking about. I'm just saying you can't just do. I believe I said your baseline story in a specific genre. You can't just make your run of the mill romance story and then just change the word from gun to blaster and expect us to believe it's Star Wars. You have to do certain things that feel Star Wars within it. Yes, of course, like Andor does a great job of that. That's why it's one of the rare instances of Star Wars doing that. But I've often seen Star Wars when we try to go fully into other genre either get weighed down by its Star Wars isms when it comes back to it, or it just completely feels like your most basics type of story in that specific genre to the point where, as you were saying earlier, with like you could read other genres or you read other classics in another genre like King and horror. Why would you not read a Stephen King horror story and waste your time on a 500-page Star Wars horror story if it's just going to be the most basic, boring horror story you've read, but it has the Force in it? Like that's what I'm saying is you need to be able to marry the genres in a way that's what's very difficult. It's a tightrope rope act, and it's very hard for Star Wars to do so because Star Wars is in and of itself a specific style of genre. It's almost reinvented and redefined the sci-fi fantasy. And so in order to do that, you have to really marry both. And I think this is going to be a good testing ground for that, where we're going to see how they decide to do it. Because we have seen, I think romance is a lot easier to do in Star Wars than horror. Horror is one that's very difficult because Star Wars, just by nature, is so fantastical that horror has to take that fantasy and kind of demonize it, right? That's something that's difficult for Star Wars because the fantasy is often a symbol of hope in Star Wars. The good versus evil is so defined. um, you'd have to take that evil and really make it even worse than it is before, which is difficult to do in a world where you have people shooting lightning out of their hands, right? So I think that's always been the challenge with horror. um, and that's why Death Troopers, I think going monster is often a way that's easier, makes it a little easier to do horror in Star Wars, because you can't, it's something that's a little bit bridge further than the Sith, right? The Sith have a lot of that supernatural horror already in them. Going monster, creating an alien species that's indicative of vampires, or an alien species that, or a mad scientist like a Frankenstein. You could do something like that, or zombies like Death Troopers. That's a way to create a Star Wars horror story that's not specifically in line with classic horror tropes, but also um, pulls those Star Wars isms in, and I think that that can make it really interesting. So we'll see where they go with that. Let's move on to our final thing here, though, because we want to take your guys' other questions, and we've been talking about the new releases for an hour, but it's been an exciting weekend in the world of Star Wars news. So I'll run all these down one final time here, and it's the comic side. We did have a lot of comic announcements as well. I mean, you expect New York Comic Con to have some comic announcements, and one of the biggest ones, at least to me, is the fact that we are getting already more High Republic, and it is the High Republic Adventures Pathfinders that is coming to your comic shop next year. Return to the High Republic era with the new Pathfinders miniseries from Dark Horse Comics. Lucasfilm revealed the covers of the first two issues, which follow a brand new team of Republic Pathfinders as they are dispatched to a distant corner of the galaxy to investigate the strange death of a Jedi Master. Written by George Mann, with artist Partha Partim, Jagdish Kumar, Michael Atiyah, and Comicraft make up the creative team for this upcoming adventure, which takes place about 20 years after Phase 2. So, kind of reaffirming something we had speculated on, is if they go back to High Republic, will they go between Phase 3 and Acolyte, or will they go between Phase 2 and Phase 1? This is kind of our answer, that our first High Republic story post High Republic Phase 3 is going to be Phase 2, Phase 1. And I think that's where they will return next if they do any more novels as well. So that was our first announcement. The second one, which has definitely been making the rounds, is the Jar Jar Binks one shot that's coming out from Ahmed Best, who's co-writing with Mark Guggenheim. Jar Jar's getting his own one shot this February. It's going to feature Kelleran Beck in a story that is said to involve the rebellion in some fashion. And obviously, from both covers, you see that Jar Jar's wearing his Cynic garb as well. So, kind of looks like a story that's going to see Kelleran Beck help Jar Jar escape Coruscant, maybe in the early days of the rebellion. Maybe Jar Jar is part of kind of staging that early rebellion with somebody like Bail Organa. It would be fun, interesting to see all that. There was a lot of speculation around the idea that Jar Jar was the one who provided the ship to Kelleran Beck for him and Grogu to escape in The Mandalorian Season 3. So we'll see if that is brought back up in this one shot. Kind of hoping that specific plotline is maybe alluded to, and then we get to see more of it in live action, because it would be fun to see Jar Jar back in live action. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. And so those were our two big American comic announcements. But we also got the announcement of Star Wars Vision's Tsukumo, which was revealed at the New York Comic Con by Viz Media, excuse me. Tsukumo from the all-star creators of the latest Ultraman manga. This tells the story in the wake of Order 66. A lone Jedi Knight accompanies a pair of droids to a rumored droid's paradise while being pursued by the Empire. That is coming out July 14th, 2026. And I got to say, the cover art for that looks awesome. I am very excited for this. Very excited for a Star Wars manga that takes place, in the main part of our Star Wars saga, Star Wars Skywalker saga. And I just think this looks really, really cool. A little less cutesy than the manga we got with the High Republic and the other one that's coming out. Is that one still coming out this year? I feel like I haven't heard anything about it
Yeah, I think
recently.
Path of the Lightsaber comes out next month, the first
Okay.
volume. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exciting. I mean, that those look a little more cartoony, a little more cutesy. This one looks a little harder, a harder edge. Obviously, it's same creative team behind Ultraman, so something that's, I think, comparable. I mean, sci-fi, both are sci-fi stories. But yeah, so going a little bit more of the maybe shonen route for Star Wars manga will be interesting as well. So those were our big three comic announcements. We also got announcements for more covers and stuff for ongoings that we already have, like Jedi Knights, and of course, the Legacy of Vader, as well as Boba Fett, Black, White, and Red. But out of those big three comic announcements, Sonic, which one stood out to you the most?
I mean, I like how meta the Caloran Beck, Jar Jar, and Ahmed best one is. Like, this is a man who was lambasted for a performance as Jar Jar that wasn't entirely on him. That was kind of shaped by George Lucas in Episode One. That drove him to like very dark places at one point in his life, and then he got his little redemption for first re-entry into Star Wars once again after the Clone Wars through Caloran Beck with the. It was like a game show. It was like a Jedi.
Yeah,
I don't
like
know
on
exactly
YouTube
what
or
it was.
something.
Yeah. It was like a YouTube show, and they're like, "Yeah, he's High Republic," and they're like, "Oh, okay." It was never, like, truly canon, and then in episode 3, when we get that, season 3 of The Mandalorian, episode 4, when we kinda get the Grogu flashback, for him to show up and be dual wielding lightsabers, like, man, like, for that one day, like, I think that must have been one of the happiest days that he's ever had as a Star Wars fan, like, just it may not be Jar Jar per se, but it's how he looks like, it's him as a Jedi Master doing some really cool stuff and having a big role in, like, one of the most beloved characters right now in Star Wars, so I'm excited for that. I'm excited for him and what voice he has to lend to both characters. It'll be very interesting, like, if he almost, like, plays the 2 different voices out and then, like, writes it out or, like, tells it to the Guggenheim or tells it to the artist. Like, I don't know what that process would look like. I think this is very uncommon in general to have an actor for 2 pretty big Star Wars characters to then get, like, a little mini series out of it. Um, it's something I wish like a Peter Mayhew could have kinda done with, like, the Chewbacca mini that came out at the start of canon, which was just not very good. Here, you have a chance of like, hey, like, you get to have the guy behind the character really do something, and not just one, but both characters. So, yeah, I also agree, I don't want it to truly show, like, the next step after, like, the escape of Kelleran and Grogu. I don't want it to just be like, "Oh, okay. Where are we going next?" It'll be done in a comic. I want that to be continued in some form as, like, another flashback or something, Mandalorian Grogu. But I think the thing that actually excites me the most of these is the High Republic, adventures. Rupert and Tawny's back, and I thought she was one of the better novel characters that we got. And, phase 2, she had a decent book, it's a bit forgotten, and it's also just kinda weighed down by the fact that, the, the Planet X junior novel was just really, really bad. So whatever was done with, like, Quest for the Hidden City, and it actually landing on the whole point of the logline of it being Quest of the Jedi, and, like, them actually being on the frontier and exploring and connecting the Republic and all that, like, that's what Phase 2 offered, and we didn't really get a lot of that. I mean, you could say the Blade, you could say parts of Path of Deceit, Battle of Jedha just for, like, what we see on Jedha, but not a lot with the Pathfinders. They were really underplayed. Like, I was very happy to see them again in the Echoes of Fear miniseries in season 3 or in Phase 3 of the High Republic, but the whole expansionist, the whole idea of like we're gonna be pushing to the edges of our government and connecting with other people who may need the help of our services, right? That's something that I really wanted Phase 2 to harp on, and we just didn't get a lot of it. So actually getting that fleshed out with a character that we already know about, a character that we now get to see older, which is gonna be very cool, right? Like that's really awesome. More stuff with Pathfinders for sure, and really fleshing out with like their technological capabilities and how that connects with them and how they work as a team. All of that stuff, very excited for. I admit I'm not super sold on the Visions manga, not necessarily because of the talent behind it. I just I wasn't very interested in Ronin as a novel when it came out, and then all my interest for it really faded when it just didn't get great reviews. This being a manga, this, with the little log line that you mentioned, I think is pretty exciting. I admit the cover looks fantastic, so I may read it. I just have a little bit more interest in Path of the Lightsaber and what Edge of Balance achieved just because they're truly in canon stories. And I just want manga to become a thing that like Star Wars comic book readers are like, yeah, I read it along with my manga, or like manga readers are like, now I read Star Wars comics. It's East meets West, but they have such similarities. I just want Star Wars to be able to like actually cater to both audiences and then create a lot more crossover. It'd be so awesome to see like a character from Path of the Lightsaber show up in like the Marvel mainline of the post Return of the Jedi comics, right? Like stuff like that. That sort of synergy, that sort of continuation, because it is comic art as a medium. I really want that to become more of a thing. Obviously, keep as much of it separated out so people can kind of stay in their own lanes as they want to, for sure. But yeah, I just have a little bit more excitement for what Path of the Lightsaber can open up. This just feels like it's gonna be a great, awesome volume to read, but I'm not necessarily sure we're gonna get like a volume 2 or like a volume 3 out of this.
That's one of the reasons why I'm really excited for Tsukumo, because I'm just hoping it becomes another series. Like, I'm hoping it's kind of the ninth Jedi of Star Wars manga, because I would just
Mhm.
love having an Elseworlds or an Infinity style take on Star Wars that you get, 4 times a year in these manga volumes, that's actually cool and different and explores different things. Because we saw both sides of Edge of Balance with High Republic. I always felt like, personally, the Edge of Balance mainline was whatever. It had some better volumes towards the end. I liked volumes 3 and 4 a lot more than volumes 1 and 2, but by far the best one to me was Precedent. And so it had some real high highs, but overall it was just kind of average. I don't have that much excitement for Path of the Lightsaber outside of it being in canon. Um, just doesn't necessarily look as much like something that appeals to me about manga, but I'm gonna give it a shot. But this, I think it looks really, really cool. So I'm hoping that if this sells well, it could be the start of something new for Star Wars, or at least even a Vision series where like 3, 4 times a year you got a new manga volume with a new Vision style story every time. I think that would be pretty sweet. That would be kind of almost like the return of Star Wars Tales, which that would be awesome. So I would love that. So that's kind of the most exciting thing personally to me out of the comic announcements. The safest thing, and I'm sure it will be good, is High Republic Adventures Pathfinders. I mean, George Mann, pretty much everything he wrote was good to great in High Republic Adventures. Or, I mean, well, High Republic Adventures, but also High Republic in general. But he wrote my favorite series of High Republic Phase 3 with Echoes of Fear. So I have no doubt that this will be another very good to great miniseries from him, and a good, fine addition to High Republic. I'm excited to return to Phase 2. Phase 2 had such great stuff around the board. Comics were a little lackluster, I guess, but overall, George Mann's work in comics was very good, and just Phase 2 was very good in general. So excited to return to that. But I think the one I'm most curious about for sure is the Jar Jar one shot. I mean, it's a one shot, so like my expectations are tempered because how much are they really going to do with it? And like you said, I mean, I'm just really hoping, purely because it is a one shot. I don't necessarily mind big answers being done in a comic versus the show, although it would feel weird to do that, but it's been 3 years by this point. Like, I'll take it in a comic, but I don't really want it in a comic one shot. Like I would
Yeah,
love it to
yeah.
be an actual story that's drawn out and has a big arc. I don't want it to just be something that has such a fast little whole filler story. And so I'm hoping that this is just more of a fun time with some allusions to what's happened in the past. If this does take place, let's say like 10 BBY, 5 BBY, around there, um, versus right after Order 66. Because that doesn't make, when you say the rebellion, it doesn't make sense to do Order 6 like right around 19 BBY when we see Kelleran Beck disappears. So I would imagine it's a lot closer to that 10 to 5 BBY range. And so hopefully it has some fun nuggets of information that lead and allude towards some of the things that happened with Kelleran and Grogu. But my expectations are more tempered because it's a one shot. But I'm very intrigued. How does Ahmed Best write this? And also, just, I mean, it's the return of Jar Jar. Really, like Jar Jar has been a divisive figure to say the least in Star Wars, but his rise and fall and then kind of resurgence in the last 5 years or so, post prequel memes, has been something that's definitely been one of the highlights to me of Star Wars prequel redemption, is seeing these actors come back and get the flowers they deserve. And not that Jar Jar was the world's greatest character, anyways, but he doesn't deserve the hate he got. And I love that he means so much to so many people because I always enjoyed Jar Jar. I saw the movie for the first time when I was 4, so it made me laugh. But Jar Jar is a character that is actually like a character that people unabashedly love now, or a lot of people do. There's still haters out there, but of course, there'll always be haters for every character. And I think it's very interesting seeing him brought back of all characters, especially when there's no anniversary next year, when there's no specific reason why he's back. It's interesting to me to decide to bring Jar Jar back specifically, even if it's just one shot, but it's like testing the waters maybe for some more stuff here in the future. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the comics. Let us know what you guys think of these comics in the chat. Kylie Stewart says Misa here. Joining us in the stream, Kylie. And then Kylie Stewart also said, have they done any books during Order 66? They did quite a few in Legends. In canon, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't, other than Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head in canon, in terms of books that they've done. Some comics have broached that. Let me look over my shoulder. Yeah, I think it's just Inquisitor. I don't think, because like certain books take place during that time period, like Thrawn Ascendancy would take place during that time period, Catalyst would take place during that time period, but they're not really about Order 66. I think Inquisitor is the closest thing you'll get to something that has significant Order 66 POV in canon novels. If you're talking Legends, there are quite a few that you can pull from. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm just checking over here. It doesn't really seem like there's anything. I mean, you can say the Kanan comic and how it's adapted in Bad Batch. That's really about it. Maybe the first issue of uh, Charles Soule's Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Um, that's yeah, no books. It would be pretty interesting. I know we Master of Evil is set for 19 BBY, but that doesn't necessarily work as like an Order 66 story. It might have like some connections or like some emotional beats or like flashbacks for what kind of is going on in Vader's head, but it was designed and written to be a story in a gap between a couple arcs of Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith, right? So that's that's probably the max. I mean, I'd like to see a story like that. It just to what degree would it make sense, right? Like, I don't know. I just don't really see a Jedi character unless, they get to have a chance to keep going and going and going. Like, Order 66 is almost like a shattering moment. It's not necessarily like an ongoing, like, trial and tribulation. It's like once if they escape the initial purge, as long as they're smart about what they're doing and they don't fall for the tricks of the Inquisitorius, they can just kind of fall off, right? They can disappear, which I think there is a possibility of having characters like that where they have like their children and their grandchildren, that they have after marrying someone or meeting someone could be like find out like almost like a core and horn of like, oh, this is what my grandfather, grandmother experienced, and this is where we can handle it. We can really build into like a conversation, but nothing more than that. I just don't. Order 66 is like a day or two max. It's so effective because you are taking hundreds of soldiers who are on the battlefield actively with their generals and their commanders, and immediately, without telling those general and commanders, flipping a switch in their brain and having them just complete an execution and spend the next 2 weeks in that extreme focus before they feel like, what was I doing? What was wrong? Like even the clones, they're not like, oh, we'll take a break from our Jedi hunting. It's like they're in like a complete daze doing it. And then once the chip wears off, once it's burnt out from the inside, they're like, why were we so like focused and obsessed? And why did we just so immediately turn on these people who always supported us and like always uplifted us and like led us in the battle after battle, right? So not much there. For your second question about like, yeah, what I was talking about the Canon Inquisitor story. Sounds cool. Yeah. Delilah S. Dawson wrote that. She does a fantastic job. Rise of the Red Blade. It's connected to two Inquisitors that you see in the Charles Soule Darth Vader comics. It's like a prequel, obviously, to what happens there to them. It's really good. It was a surprise read last year. We were like very shocked by how good the quality was. I just wish that there was a little bit more about the Inquisitorius. There's some really great stuff about like the Battle of Geonosis. There's like some really nice like coverage of the Clone Wars into Order 66. And then the actual Inquisitor stuff, it's like, okay, we can get into it, but we don't really like stay amongst Inquisitorius as much as I was hoping we would. That's like my only criticism of the book, because otherwise, a fantastic surprise last year.
Yeah, definitely. I was shocked how good it was. So definitely check that out if you're interested in canon POV, especially of like just the early rise of the Inquisitorius and the fall of the Jedi. There's some great stuff. The book is better in that first 2/3 when it's building towards Order 66 and stuff like that. So I think that's a good suggestion. And F16 says, I feel like canon is really lacking when it comes to Clone Wars novels in general. Yeah, absolutely. Basically, just have two. It's Brotherhood and Dark Disciple. And Brotherhood's barely a Clone Wars novel because it takes place so early in the story. The war is barely starting. So kind of just have one big Clone Wars novel. Other than that, not too much in terms of war stories for the Clone Wars. So uh, that would be something that I would love them if they're going to do these gap filler stories. I'd love them to do more Clone Wars stuff. And like I said, I said this too about this, connecting the sequel point and everything I made earlier about Star Wars books needing sequels. One thing I said a few weeks ago too about Star Wars books returning to like that Legends quality is you can tell stories about Obi-Wan and Anakin, just tell multiple stories. Don't make it a gap filler in between two episodes of the Clone Wars. Tell it about an unseen battle that we never saw in the Clone Wars and have 3 books about it, right? Like that's something they could do. I'd love to see them do that. So hopefully that happens soon. Let's go back to the top for Anthony Tiff, who kicked off our chat tonight. And again, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We are going to take your guys' questions for the remainder of the stream. So if you're watching right now, make sure you send in your chat. It is usually first come, first serve, although Super Chat bumps you up to the top. We try to get in everybody's questions, but we usually do run out of time as it is a 2-hour show. So make sure you send in that Super Chat if you want to guarantee an answer on tonight's show. We also greatly appreciate the support. Really helps out our channel. You can check out Patreon, YouTube membership programs as well. Both links are in the description of this video. They provide you with priority chat access if you are of a certain tier. There are a lot of other perks in those platforms as well, so make sure you check those out. And if you're watching right now, we have a lot more people watching than have liked the video. Make sure you like it. It really helps our channel. Easy to do. Just scroll down, hit that like button. All right, starting with Anthony Tiff, who says, hi, I've been busy with college. Just wanted to say that the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer looks awesome. Really excited to see it. I also pre-ordered the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith novel. The artwork looks really cool. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the Mandalorian Grogu trailer. Seems like a lot of other people didn't. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a pure teaser. I like that we're returning to pure teasers, but I also acknowledge that it's too late in the marketing to just go with pure teaser now. That should have been something they did back in April at Star Wars Celebration. But glad you're excited for the Mandalorian and Grogu. I'm hoping it's really good. And I can't wait for the Revenge of the Sith novel. Glad you got to pre-order yours. It does look absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not a trailer that I love, I'll admit that, but it is one that I like the cute moments of, and I like the little interesting bits. It just I don't know if it's because this is basically half a season turned into a movie, right? And streamlining other plot elements that would have been in there that might have been focused more on like Boba's reintroduction and all that with the twins. It just okay, like is this how it should look like? And I know there's Bryce Dallas Howard was talking about this recently at I don't know what convention she was at, but someone asked her about, like, the color grading and the criticisms of, like, color grading in the Mandoverse, how it doesn't really have, like, a lot of depth and richness in a lot of its color choices, which I think is a pretty fair argument, especially if you're gonna bump this one, especially The Mandalorian, up into movies, you wanna make it feel more like a movie. And she did mention that they hired, like, a really great group, for, specific, like, film directors to help them with color grading for Ahsoka. She doesn't know if it's happening with The Mandalorian and Grogu. I would love if it is. I hope that Favreau's hearing that. I mean, the nice thing about these trailers is, like, a big thing that you can do with teaser trailers especially is, like, that's, like, your like rough draft. This is like you saying like this is how it's mostly looks like, guys. And then you were like, "Oh, people don't really like how that looks. I'm gonna tweak the colors." That's like one of the first things you'll see by the next trailer. So I'm hoping just with a little bit nicer color grading, the film will look better because there some it's also the shots that were selected. There weren't like any like fascinating shots or shots that were completely new that we'd already seen. If we'd see some crazy like hallway action sequence like we did from the League Celebration trailer with a little bit nicer color grading, I think immediately people would have been a lot more positive. It's just like the type of shots we see is like we're sitting at a table, we're seeing Grogu with his little friends in a little tunnel, we're seeing like a little blurry Zeb jumping around. It's stuff that's we've already been so normalized with in the show itself that it's like, okay, so what is the point of making this into a movie besides you're gonna make more money, right? And yeah, hopefully we do get some of that like elevation with like the little comments just like how like a recent example in Superman, that first trailer, people were hating on the color grading. I was definitely one of them. I'm like, oh god, it just looks like slightly yellowish and green. And by the time you saw the film, it was like it's still kinda there, but it seems like they've actually cleaned it up and, like, corrected it, and color grading is something that throughout post-production, you're tweaking, you're tweaking, you're tweaking until you finally send it off. So, I think this is something that can actually be voiced and hopefully be corrected, in time by May for sure. So, if you don't like it, make a point of saying that. Or I know you don't, Anthony, per se, but for others in the chat and all that, if you feel like, I just it doesn't really look as colorful or rich as it could be, say it online because that's I think honestly, I think that all these trailer companies actually bring back to the production and the post-production studios and be like, this is what the reception is like from the content you let us kind of splice together. This is what we can offer you in return for you giving us some of the content to actually start and putting some of these trailers out.
Brandon's first question of the night says, "What do you guys think about Tron Ares? Was it good or mid compared to previous Tron movies like 1982's and Tron Legacy?" Well, personally, Brandon, I have not gotten a chance to see it yet. I didn't get a chance to get out this weekend to go to the movies, but I'm looking forward to checking it out. Heard it was kind of mid, but all to be fair, like all the Tron movies have gotten mid reviews and kind of mid reception when they've come out. Legacy, well, really both Tron and Tron Legacy have both kind of grown with a cult following over time. I'd say the original Tron has a little bit more cult following. I've been wanting to rewatch Legacy, and we had a viewer on our show a while ago. He used to join our show a lot, and shout out to that viewer. It's been years since that person's commented on our lives, but used to beg us to rewatch Tron Legacy. and I need to because I haven't seen it since I saw it in theaters.
I'm seeing in the chat here that we're muted. Uh, Interesting.
I'm my microphone's on. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. I can hear myself on the stream. I don't know, Liam, if you can say something. Can you
I
guys
can
hear
hear.
us now? It seems like it's fine again. Yeah, it seems about right. Let us know, Kylie, Stewart, F16, Critical Thinker, whoever is in the chat, if you can hear us. Seems okay. Great, awesome. Yeah, usually we sometimes have this issue with OBS, the software that we use, where it drops entirely. But everything looks pretty good here. I think you could see us still move and talk. It just the audio didn't come through. I don't know. We're slowly revamping the process. This is the first time we've had like the chat box work on this new little update, and it's still a prototype. We're definitely trying to revamp everything into the new year with 2026 really being a huge Star Wars year. So bear with us with these small little technical difficulties, but yeah, for what we got in Tron Ares, I did see Tron Ares. I saw all three Tron films actually, and I saw parts of what like a little clip. I read up a little bit more on Tron Evolution, Tron Uprising, Tron the Next Day. I kind of do this thing where, especially like when like a legacy sequel or like a sequel of something's coming out, I try to rewatch the stuff before. I had never seen Tron. I had seen Tron Legacy, and Tron Legacy was very cool. There used to be someone on our channel in these like live streams when we used to play like Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor who'd always talk about the director Kaczynski, who also did Top Gun Maverick. And he's like, I want them to come back to do a Star Wars film, to do like Tron Legacy sequel. And I don't know if they're still here. They changed their name, but I would have liked to have seen him again for Tron Ares. But yeah, having watched everything, having like dived into the universe for like the last week or so, and it's probably been the first time in like 12, 13 years since I've really done something like that with Tron. But I found the original Tron to be good. It again, all of these movies are technological marvels, cinematically really great, really awesome to see. Soundtrack, I'd say it was more iconic in Legacy and Ares than the original, but there are still some nice little moments. Uh, it's a very simple story in Tron. I think there's some moments of like almost like digital spirituality that it almost like feels ready to jump into, but it just doesn't. And it's like, okay, it's like a proof of concept, really. And it's just a proof of concept that has some moments with the character of Tron specifically that I'm like, oh wow, like this makes you really think about like the possibilities. And for the 80s, I think it probably had like way more of a feeling, right? And then Tron Legacy was essentially like a reboot of that, right? And just like, hey, but let's actually deal with modern technology and an evolution of everything. But Legacy, now having watched everything, it's kind of weird to me because it's not truly it's not truly like a huge direct sequel. It's like not a requel like we got like with the Force Awakens and Jurassic World where like they're redoing the first film. It's not really trying to do that. It's a proper sequel, but it's almost like trying to do like the Iron Man 2 of like let's explode out this like one cool film into a whole universe worth of material with Uprising and all the other tie-in material that kinda came out of it. I even read, like, the Tron Betrayal comic. I was just trying to get the whole timeline down. I like Legacy. It's a beautiful film, but I found myself really struggling with the character moments because that's where it should have really started shining, and it just kinda got stuck in, like it just got stuck, like, the character of, like, Olivia Wilde's character, Cora, she's just pretty girl who's, like, infatuated with Sam Flynn. Garrett Hedlund almost does, like, a Hayden Christensen where he has some cool moments. He doesn't necessarily have any cringe per se, but there's no real richness in him than the way that Jeff Bridges, just because of how talented he is as an actor, can really elevate, like, very basic dialogue at times throughout his career. It's really the action that's fantastic in that Daft Punk score. Like it's a great music video for the latest Daft Punk album at that time. That's how I looked at it. Tron Ares, it's it's like more of a sequel to the original Tron and like a spin-off. It's like a half sequel to Legacy. It doesn't really have as much connective tissue as I'd want to Legacy. But that Nine Inch Nails album, I people were criticizing it. I thought it was actually really great, especially in theaters. It's, like, up front and center, and it's booming. I think it plays really well with the character of Ares and, like, a little bit of the questions of, like, AI and, like, what they would think about the people programming behind them, what they would do if they were brought into the world and all that. I actually found it one of the more coherent of the 3 stories with, like, its ideas and technology. Did I think, like, the characters were superb or anything? No, not really, but I found Jared Leto actually pretty decent here. I found the action, the thing that I was most worried about, to be pretty good. I just wish there's more stuff on the grid, but a lot of the stuff in the real world was pretty good. And again, the Nine Inch Nails album was very strong in the context of the film. It's not probably not as easy to listen to as like the Legacy Daft Punk album is on its own, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I got to see an IMAX 3D, which this is definitely a film that's designed to be seen in the best format possible. Um, yeah, I don't know. I would also say, like, from a film perspective, this is a film that doesn't really have, like, the wide vistas of Tron Legacy. That's kinda where, like, you see all these TikTok edits of, like, how beautiful Legacy still looks, how technology insane it still is today. Fully agree with that. Ares doesn't have that, but and you can tell, like, the budget relative, like, if we adjust for inflation and all that, it's much lower than what Legacy had. But I the choices made here, especially since I believe it's David Fincher's cinematographer who was actually working on it, are actually quite solid. So it's a probably an easier entry point into Tron besides the original Tron. It's probably the most coherent of the 3. It just does this weird thing where it's like it doesn't really truly commit to being a legacy sequel, and it kinda is a spin-off, and then it's also, like, trying to set up a Tron 4, and it just doesn't seem like with the box office it will get that anytime soon. It seems like if they do a sequel, the smartest thing to do is bring back Kaczynski, bring back Jared Leto if it makes sense for his character, bring back Sam Flynn and Cora, and finish off everything, be like, "This is the final piece of this cult franchise. You won't get anything more, but we'll wrap up every thread." This being that quasi sequel, this being a spin-off of sorts, it limited how much I really liked it, but I found it like a really fun theater experience for sure compared to what I'm assuming I would have felt watching Legacy because of how much Legacy is just so much more focused on like its world instead of its story and the character beats, especially making Jeff Bridges feel so boring. And when here you feel like as limited as the role is here in Ares, I was like, wow, I this feels more like the Jeff Bridges of the original film and throughout his career. So a long answer, but I like all 3. They're not fantastic by any means, but they're audiovisual treats with great albums that you can listen to.
Yeah, so I went back and listened to where the audio dropped for some reason. Basically, I said I haven't seen Tron Ares, hoping to see it this week. It's something that I know I probably won't end up watching if I don't see it in theaters. So I want to see it in theaters. Um, but right now I do a lot of horror, and so that's kind of my focus when I have my free times to watch movies. It's been all horror, and that's kind of it. So I can't wait to get out to see it. I want to see it before it goes because there's not too much competition coming for it, but it didn't do that well this weekend. So I don't want to miss out on seeing it in theaters because I did see Tron Legacy in theaters back in the day. But I did want to rewatch Tron Legacy first because I haven't seen it since it came out. So it's been a minute. But Brandon also asks, have either of you seen the Tron Legacy spin-off show on Disney Plus, Tron Uprising? If so, deserves to another season, or if it was canceled. I have not seen it. I think you mentioned it right in your last what you
I
were just
know
talking
the
about, something.
story beats, but it was just super not it was on Disney XD, right? And Disney XD kind of came out at this weird period of time where streaming had just started kicking in for a lot of kids and how they viewed stuff. So, and they just dumped it at weird time slots. I've heard really great things. I know, and the plot elements are pretty cool and connected to like the later games, but for that show, it had like crazy cast. It had Aaron Paul was in it, like, it had Olivia Wilde come back. It had, like, a bunch of big name actors, and it just didn't succeed because the film was not like this 700, $800 million grosser. It was like 400 something. If had been, then they probably would have kept it in a nicer time slot. We probably do get, like, at least 2 seasons, 2nd season wrapping it all up. But I've heard it's, like, the most well-rounded, most mature version of Tron. So I do wanna check it out or at
That's
least
cool.
see some sort of summarization at some point.
That's cool to hear. I've not even heard anything about it. I've heard of it. I've never heard anything about it. So cool to know that it's actually pretty good. I feel like Tron Ares really only got greenlit because of its popularity in the theme parks, not even as a
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
Because Tron, the light cycle ride at Shanghai Disneyland was so big, they brought it to Florida, and it's so big there that I feel like they just were like, let's try it again and see if the theme park helped boost it, because they've waited 20 plus years each time they've done a Tron
Yeah,
sequel. Or this time it was a little less. This time it was 15. But you know, I think if they're really going to go all in on Tron, I mean, you kind of have to make more than one in a smaller stretch in order to really try to convince people that you believe in it, right? Like
yeah.
they kind of just seem like it's just like a let's try it and hope. But I don't know. Tron Ares just never looked good enough to, like, when the reviews came out, me say I gotta see that no matter what. And I guess I also just don't have the predisposition already for the franchise. But
Yeah,
Brandon, do you?
oh, sorry, just to
I
add
was
to
just
that, uh sorry, you wanna go ahead?
no, I was just gonna say, like, Brandon, are you like a big Tron fan? Like, is there something you would recommend as a Tron fan, as like for somebody like me who's seen the other two movies but not necessarily I wouldn't consider myself a Tron fan. Like, is there something you think I should watch that would make me a Tron fan now? Because I would like to know, because I think it's a very cool world. I haven't been impressed by any of the stories I played. Really, only the video game that I played in the arcades, the original video game. That's been my favorite Tron experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Ares is just a weird film too because it at one point, the sequel to Legacy with Kaczynski, with Olivia Wilde, with Garrett Hedlund was, like, actually about to start filming just a couple months away, and then Tomorrowland, the Brad Bird film, just completely bombed, and then at that point, they went fully into Marvel, they got Star Wars, so obviously that was rolling ahead. Like, Tron at one point was positioned with Legacy to be like, yeah, it might not have been super big, but we're gonna continue and, like, wrap up with another film or get, like, a one more big swing at it, right? And Ares apparently was a character that was in the original Legacy script that was kinda moved, and apparently Jared Leto's really the only reason we got him this film, right? Like, he made Ares way more central. He wanted that play that character for a long time. He was produced for this. So, yeah, it's really just because Jared Leto and because the theme parks that we have this film, which is, like, it doesn't slot in super perfectly with Legacy, but Legacy also doesn't slot in super perfectly with Tron. It's really just the father-son storyline between Tron and Tron Legacy that you have to use, like, pre-deep fake, fully CGI faces for, like, a younger Jeff Bridges, and it just doesn't really work 100%. This one feels even more disconnected in some ways, but I was surprised how coherent it felt for something that should just feel like a patchwork job. I'm like, yeah, this could be pretty interesting. This could be nicely standalone. I just really hope that even if they can't get a movie, this feels like it's ripe for like a 4 episode event series on Disney Plus where you wrap up old elements. You have like one or two big grid sequences, keep the rest of it in the real world as this film really leans more into, obviously. And you could see that in 5 years, I think. I think that's feasible. I think streaming will rebound to some more maturity, and you can take a big swing here and finish off this cult franchise because I don't see too much more legs for this besides like comics and games, and if they really want to, books, but I don't think anyone would want to see what comes after Ares to be concluded in a book. It should be in some sort of live action for sure.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird that it hasn't had much of a life in terms of video games, right? Because I mean, the whole
Yeah.
basis is that it's a digital world, and back when people were still discovering what digital worlds meant. So, like, the game itself, even the original arcade game, is basically just taking the games they play within the film and then making a game out of it. It's not its own story, really. So there's not really a Tron. I think there was a Legacy spin-off game. There might have been some other ones, but like it's surprising that there hasn't been like a AAA Tron game. That to me would be where you would really try the storytelling to try to get fans onto this franchise because it's all steeped in the video game world. And I think we've also seen other major movie franchises and other major pop culture franchises have successful video games that weren't that popular, you know, before the games, and then that's kind of provided a resurgence because the one thing that's consistent with gamers is people will try anything if it gets great reviews and is considered a
Yeah.
really great game. Now, the negative side with that is you have to make a great game because as we've seen with something like Outlaws, if you make a good game or a fine game, people won't buy it in today's world because games are so expensive. So you need to make like at least a 9 out of 10 game, which is obviously very difficult, but I think video games would be the place for it to find a second life because I think enough there's enough crossover interest between people who are fans of Tron who are also fans of video games. If you are able to tell a great story that can maybe rely on a little bit more tropey, cheesy, goofy things that would be a little bit more acceptable in video games than in films, maybe it can find a second life there. But yeah, I think its film life is done for now, unless they see a massive resurgence in Disney Plus viewership or in um, theme park specific attendance for Tron specifically. Brandon's third question was since Tron has mixed reviews, I guess it kind of just answered that. If Tron 4 happens, then what is the plot and direction it should go? Well, I haven't seen Ares, so I can't comment on plot, but I really don't think you're ever going to see. I don't think you're going to see a Tron 4 in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be another 10 to 15-year wait. The only shot you have is that it's one of those cult hits on specifically on streaming where like people are subscribing to watch it. Everybody's talking about it once it goes to streaming. We really haven't seen too many of those when it comes to streaming. You used to see them in home video a lot, but you also need to see it for a long time. Like Moana 2 got made and wasn't a TV show because they saw 3-4 years it was the number one movie on Disney Plus. So you have to have like kind of that consistent level of growth on Disney Plus in order for it to be made in the next 5 years. I'm not saying that they won't convince themselves again that it's like going to be close enough to breaking even. To or the really each Tron movie has been, except the first one. I don't think the first one did very well in the box office, but Legacy and Ares are going to be close enough to the break even point to where some studio executive in 20 years could convince themselves that, hey, maybe we should try Tron again. But I don't think you're going to see Tron 4 anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything for Liam, but that mid-credit scene is probably where Tron 4 should go, at least in the grid story. It's got a lot of great connectivity throughout Tron's history with what they did there. Um, so I'm excited for some answer to that. And I think we don't necessarily need to see Ares again as a character with Jared Leto, but he is almost pursuing like the sequel to Legacy at the end of the film, right? So yeah, like I said, just put all those characters from areas that are like you don't even necessarily have to go with. I want Greta Lee back because I think she's a great actress, and this is a kind of a film where she doesn't get to flex her strengths, but she is still pretty decent with the chemistry that she has with Jared Leto. So her, Jared Leto, Garrett Hedlund, Olivia Wilde, Jeff Bridges, just let him have another big cameo role of some sort. Just connect all the tissue as needed from the first Tron film, wrap it up though with like a proper legacy sequel. And like I said before, I think the best thing to do to sell it is just be like Kaczynski, we want you to be doing Disney films. So how about we'll give you all the budget you want and make your proper sequel. We just need you to incorporate some stuff from Ares and stuff to make that a little bit more elevated. Some more stuff from the original Tron that wasn't necessarily as much as we were pushing for when we were making it this back in like 2009. And you get a deal to make like whatever film you want to do next. Just finish this up strong.
Brandon's last question, and it might be one of the last or fourth question. And we don't have too much time tonight. More time tonight, anybody? Excuse me. We don't have too much more time tonight, everybody. So if you want to send in your last questions, make sure you do so. Super Chat guarantees your question answered tonight. If not, we're going to have to run down the last few here. We have about 5 minutes left in our stream, and then we're going to call it a night. But make sure you save your questions for next week and come back next Tuesday and join us and send in your questions then. Brandon says, fourth question, do you think MCU Phase 5 shows will be good with the major announcements from New York Comic Con, like Daredevil Born Again Season 2, Vision Quest, X-Men 97 Season 2, and Wonder Man? Well, I think Daredevil Born Again Season 2 was always supposed to come out like within a year of this show because they shot it all at once, but still kind of shocked that it's almost exactly a year and it's going to be coming out. So like that's to me is very exciting as a fan of the way we used to do it back in the day with TV. That we are actually getting a season 2 within a year of the season 1. That to me is a wonderful return to form for streaming from the old ways of TV. So yeah, I'm excited for that. And I like Daredevil Born Again season 1 enough. I thought it was a pretty good season. Overall, I think the story itself you can tell was cut in half, but I thought it had enough plot threads that I was interested in. It could have used a lot better pacing, but overall, I thought the character was pretty good and the plot threads were pretty good. So I enjoyed that. I think out of those things, that's probably the thing I'm most excited for. X-Men 97, also very good. Excited to see season 2, just because it's not, or at least as of now, not directly influencing the MCU. It very well could after we see Doomsday. I think that's a little lower on the tier for me. Wonder Man's last. Wonder Man, I thought the trailer looked fun, but like it just feels like one of the last remnants of that Chapek era of like, let's make as many things as we can, as fast as we can. And even though it's taken 5 years for this to come out, it just doesn't, I don't really see where in the MCU this fits, like I don't see the importance of it now. I'm interested because Wonder Man is a character that it actually has a long tenured history within the Avengers. Like he's in some very notable Avengers stories and has been a part of the Avengers for a long time. So I think he's actually like out of all these random characters we made shows about and stuff, he's one of the few characters that actually has a legacy within the MCU teams that we've seen, the larger and narrative. I just don't know how specifically this show is going to fit into like leading into Doomsday, leading into Secret Wars. How are we really going to care that much about Wonder Man? But the talent is there, so I'm hoping it's good. But I think that's the one I'm least excited for. Vision Quest, I'm excited for just because I like the character of Vision. I thought WandaVision was well done. I thought Vision's arc specifically in WandaVision was quite good. And so I'm excited to see where they take that. And we've also been waiting for that show forever. So interested to see where that goes. But yeah, I believe they're all Phase 6 shows.
Yeah.
Not to correct you there, Brandon, but yeah, I believe they're all Phase 6 shows. And I think I think we're in decent hands. I just think Doomsday and Secret Wars are going to be such a reset for this universe that we can't take too many of the things we see in this fully as like a they're going to lead into the future of the MCU. I think a lot of it's going to be filler stuff. That's why I think the season twos are going to be the most exciting things because we have stories we're already building off of. So you are going to feel like you're propelling character before ultimately the like shoehorned in big massive changes to the MCU are going to affect whatever future of the other shows we eventually see. And not to mention that just the if Vision, I'm not quite sure, is Vision Quest and Wonder Man, are they both miniseries? If they are, then
I
I'm even less excited for them because I
uh,
just Marvel hasn't had a great track record with the miniseries. So
I well, I'm not sure about Wonder Man. I can see that setting being something that can be explored a lot more for pretty cheap for season
yeah,
2. Um, I think Vision Quest is kinda, like, falling into, like, the whole, uh, WandaVision, Agatha All Along, and Vision Quest as, like, the final piece of the puzzle of, like, that story. It's like the little trilogy. So I don't necessarily see a season 2 for it, but I think it could just be the wrap up of stuff. It's gonna deal with the other Maximoff, the Speedster, I think is also in there. Ultron's in there too. There's like Friday, Eat It. It'll be very interesting. I'm not quite sure what to expect of it. We haven't heard any like serious leaks about it, and there's no set images. But, I thought Agatha all along would be a like, why are we getting this show? And it ended up being pretty good. I was actually quite pleased
yeah.
with it, and it was a nice sequel to WandaVision. So if this is a sequel to WandaVision and Agatha all along, and sets up like the champions to show up in, Doomsday or Secret Wars or like post Secret Wars, sure. I don't know how much more there is for White Vision now that he has his memories restored to like be like, let's make that multiple seasons. I think this is more just to get him back into the action, back into the fray.
Okay. Well then yeah, I mean I think just in general I get less excited for the limited series of Marvel because I haven't seen one that I've truly loved. And Agatha was way better than I was expecting it to be. So that was a positive, but it also feels like it's completely set up for season two. So I'm expecting more with Agatha. But yeah, so that would be my answer. I would say Daredevil's the one I'm most excited for, then X Men, then Vision, then Wonder Man.
Yeah, that's the same for me.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Sorry we couldn't get to every question. We had a big question week, but we also had a lot of news to talk about. We wanted to talk about all the latest in Star Wars with you all. So thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you save those questions, though. Bring them back next week for us to answer. We love discussing all things Star Wars as well as other franchises with you all. So hopefully you had fun tonight talking with us. If you're watching right now, haven't liked the stream, please do so. There are more people watching right now that have liked it. So that really helps out our channel. Make sure you subscribe and check out our Patreon and YouTube membership programs. Like I said, you get priority chat access. It's one of the perks. If you sign up, you can also check out all the other perks that we have on there. Lots of great perks on all different types of tiers. So for as little as 99 cents a month, you can join our Patreon and YouTube membership programs. Thanks so much for watching this stream tonight, everybody. We will see you all next